Well, welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Meet the Author. Today I have Emma Scott with me. Emma, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me. It's so nice to be here.
Yes, I'm so happy you're here. I like to always start these interviews off with some easy icebreaker type question just to get everybody nice and settled, maybe if we have a few nerves. So I have to ask you, do you feel like you are more of an introvert or more of an extrovert?
Oh, wow, that's a cool question. I wasn't expecting something like that. I think what's the term? It's like an extroverted introvert. Like I'm perfectly happy being by myself and in my own little world. And I'm like, if someone says, "Oh, we're going to a party," I could, if I'm not in the right mood, I really don't want to go. But once I'm there, I'm like, "Wow!" And I'm like, "Party!" And like I'm like really outgoing. But then as soon as we get home, I'm like, "Oh, phew, thank God that's over." So the mix of the two, I guess.
I can totally relate to that. Sometimes where I'm like in the mood and someone invites you to a party and you're like, oh, yeah, sure, I'll go. And then it's like the day of and you're sitting there and you're
Yeah,
like, why did I commit to that?
I'll have the opposite too. I'll be like, "Oh god, I don't wanna go," and then the day arrives, I'm like, "Okay, I can do this." But yeah, it depends on the mood of the time that I'm asked, not the time of
I totally understand that because I'm the same way. Well, I like to always, again, do these interviews and it's meet the author. So we're obviously going to talk about your books a lot, but I also want people to get to know who you are. So kind of just walk us through, your journey, how you started writing and what your life has been like since you've started writing.
Okay, wow, so that goes back a ways. I'm an old timer. So I've always wanted to be a writer, but I always thought it was gonna be fantasy. I was very much into fantasy. I loved, like, George R. R. Martin, like, he came a little bit later, but I loved Tolkien. I loved just all the fantasy guys and the dragons and all that. And so that's where I started writing, and I thought for sure that was gonna be my path until, I was in this, writing contest, and they assign you a genre, and they assigned me romance, and I realized that all of my fantasy had always had this centralized romance anyway. That I really liked that part of it. And I had actually, excuse me, gotten like some flack from like dudes who were like, it's too mushy, there's too much romance, should be more action. I'm like, well, I don't know. It just seems like what interested me was the relationship. And so I wrote this book or wrote this story for this contest. And then my brother was like, you could really expand this into a book if you want. The romance market is kind of big. And I was like, I don't know, that doesn't seem like me, but okay, I could give it a try. And so I did, and I ended up really, really loving it. So I expanded that story. I drop kicked it into Amazon. It did nothing, but I didn't care. I had such a great time. So I wrote another one. And then I wrote Rush, the original Rush. And that really started to pull readers to me. That was all Noah's doing, I'm sure. And I realized at that point that like this was something I really wanted to like focus on and do, and that I really love doing. And so it just kind of took off from there. So from fantasy to, and I've never written a romantic fantasy, which is really weird. That would seem like the natural progression, but it's like poor fantasy. I left it in the rear view for at least for now.
Maybe one day you'll circle back and it'll be, enough years in the past that you're like, you know what, I'm ready to tackle this. And
Yeah, exactly. And you know what? Now that I think about it, I did have an old romance or an old fantasy that I kind of resurrected and I put out there for a little while, but it was supposed to be like 7 books long, I think, and I was just like, I can't commit to that right now. So sorry, sorry guys.
that's the thing with fantasy series. They're always so long. If you find a fantasy series that's like 2 or 3 books, you like count yourself lucky because normally they're like 7, 8, 9. Like they just keep
Yeah.
going.
Well, it's because the world building takes so long, and if you don't wanna leave the world, you've written it, and now you don't wanna just abandon it because you put all this work in, and so it's fun to keep exploring it too. At least that's for me, like, that's what I could see why you wouldn't just wanna keep having to rebuild new worlds for each series, so it's a
Yeah.
lot of work. So I put a book in, set it in New York City, and I was like, "Oh my god, I don't have to explain what New York City is, it just is, it's so easy."
It's just New York. Everybody gets it.
Yeah, I did it, I don't have to describe anything.
That's awesome. So do you feel like, Rush was your book that really changed your progression? Or do you feel like maybe there was another book that was like, okay, this was, the thing that people most know you by and they come back to, this book, this moment, that
Yeah.
really changed your career?
So kind of like 3 books could kind of fit into that category. Like Rush really started bringing me like a core group of readers that I feel like I still have. And then my next book after that, a big blogger picked it up. It's How to Save a Life, and she really loved it. And back then, she had bloggers were like it was kind of a smaller market, well, a lot smaller market, and so she blew it up just by dint of loving it. And so that was kind of like okay, I can keep doing this as a career thanks to her in large part from that book. And then right after that book came Full Tilt. And I think Full Tilt is probably the book that most people recognize the most, or when they think about what I do, that's the book that they pops to mind first. And I think it's the one that is like, I would call it like a signature book at this point. It wasn't as huge at the time, but it's been like long distance. It's going the distance. So yeah, I think so. Those three in a row were kind of what launched the whole shebang.
Yeah, Full Tilt is how I found you, but then
Mm,
I've gone back since, and once you re-released Rush with the deluxe edition, let's kind of jump into that because I think that's so fun that you
yeah.
wrote Rush, but then you know, are had it republished and with all this bonus, you know, content that I feel like it really solidified the story for Charlotte and Noah. What was that thought process like? Like you finished this book, you know, but you wanted to add more to it. How did that kind of all formulate and come about?
Well, so I actually had a novella that went with it. Did you find the novella? See,
I didn't read the novella the first time.
yeah, see, I had a feeling that that was kind of the case with a lot of people. So I wrote Rush, and without trying to spoiler, there's a section in it where Noah goes off and does something on his own. The hero
Mhm.
goes off and does something, and like when I first wrote it, I left all that off the page, and I thought because the book was already kind of long, and I didn't know, how much to include or if I should. I didn't want to bore people. Being boring is like my ultimate pet peeve fear in writing. You can hate it, you can love it, but if you think it's boring, oh, that's the worst. So I wrote a novella, and the readers were also like, "Well, what happened to Noah? What was he doing this whole time?" And so I wrote a novella to kind of fix that, to like kind of show where he was, and also had, in order for the novella to stand on its own, it kind of had to have its own drama and its own
Mhm.
through line and its own stuff, which is fine, but the core of it was just what was Noah doing. And so when it came time to update the cover, I thought, it probably is a good time to just kind of fix this problem. Like I should have always had what Noah was doing in the original book to give the kind of complete picture. So I wrote some more bonus. I wrote some chapters for Charlotte to kind of balance it out, so it wasn't just like all Noah at the end, which was kind of nice as well because I got to see what she was doing. What she was doing during all that time was also kind of like skipped over, and
Mhm.
now it's not, and now it's kind of restored, and I feel like it's the story that it should have been from the get-go. And then I left all the extra drama from the novella. There's some parts I really love, but it's not as necessary, and my whole thing is whatever serves the story is number one. And so I have no problem like letting that go and just making this edition kind of be like that's what happened, if that makes sense.
No, I like that. So did you go and like when you finished Rush, did you already have the novella planned at that point, or was it more like you had put the book out there and then people just kept saying like, "Where was Noah? What's happening to Noah? Like, what is this time in between that made you want to go back and write it?"
Yeah, that's exactly it. And also I had my own feeling of like, oh, I should have just gone for it and put it in there. And so when a lot of readers were like, "Well, what was he doing?" Like, and it was from a place of love too. They really love Noah, and they really loved his journey and his struggles. And so to leave that heart of it kind of out kind of didn't make sense. So it was like I was repairing the damage a little bit by doing the novella. But like a lot of people, they move on, or there's just so many books to read, they're not keeping track. So they're not getting the full picture, like, one right after the other. A lot of people, I think, haven't even read the novella and didn't know that it was even there. So it's better, I think, to, yeah, like I said, fix the problem and just kind of like restore their story to what it should have been all along.
Do you feel like since Rush has been the deluxe version has been, you know, re-released that people feel like you've been seeing the positive feedback of people being like, "Oh my gosh, this feels so complete now," and like, you know, "I love this story," or people have read it again like a different time. They read the original Rush, now they've read this version. Have you kind of seen that from fans?
Yeah, I mean, I try not to read too many reviews. I've been busy also, so I'm like kind of like I used to be so like on top of it. I was just like, what are the people saying? And now I'm like, okay, let's just chill. I just feel like it's more like I hope they love it that way. And for those who have never read the novella or didn't even know that they really like the story as it was. And then I do have some old time long-term fans who are like, oh yeah, now I like how it's integrated. And then the really sweet ones are always like, but I really liked what was in the novella too. And I'm like, sorry. But yeah, I think overall it's been definitely very positive. So I'm really grateful to them.
That's really awesome. And I know, you know, with the book, obviously one of the big characters is Noah and he's going through a lot. How did you, you know, put yourself in his position to write all of that and, you know, going through those struggles? Because I think it's safe to say most times when you have romance books, it's like they're not necessarily light, but the
Mhm.
characters like they don't have things that they're dealing with. They don't have inner turmoil. If it does, it's a lot smaller compared to the fact that he like had a huge life change and had to
Mhm.
learn to live life differently. How was it, deciding that you wanted to write him that way?
Well, it's I kind of gravitate to that kind of story to begin with, like the idea of like putting characters through hard things and watching them come out the other side like better and stronger for it because I think that's kind of like our journey as humans tends to be. Life throws a bunch of crap at us and we have to like, get through it and hopefully we get through it with a lot of help and love and strength and knowing about like our own inner strength. So I really like that. But I didn't set out for that so much. I was taking a jog actually and I heard this conversation in my head. Like my imagination just started or I got a download or I don't know what of this what sounded like an interview, like a job interview between a really grouchy guy and a sweet girl. And then like I realized that became the actual as soon as I got home, I ran home and I wrote that down. And that was the inner job interview between Noah and Charlotte when she goes to interview for to be his assistant. And I didn't even know at the time that he was blind until I started writing that. I was trying to figure out why is he so mad? Why is he mad at her? He's not really mad at her. What's going on? Like what the dynamic was. And then the story just kind of unfolded from there. And I was like, oh, I see. Like it's sort of like Stephen King says that writing a story is like you don't write it and create it. You kind of like you're an anthropologist and you kind of dig it up and it's already there. And I felt like the more I just kind of thought about it, the more it just kind of like came to be and it was already that way all along, if that makes sense. I know that sounds so crazy, but that's how a lot of the plots that I have come to me. Like they're a little nugget, and if I just sit with them, they kind of like blow into something else. So it's pretty cool.
So what is your typical writing process like? You just said, you kind of get the nuggets. Do you feel like I guess this is a two-part question. So the first part is do you feel like those little nuggets that you get are like just things that you experience in life that you're, at the airport or you're out doing something and like you see like a moment or you're jogging, you just like have this moment and you're like, okay, that could be a scene in a book. And or do you just kind of like you don't take anything from real life and you just kind of think something up and you're like, okay, hey, let's run with that.
Um, that's a good question. I think like sometimes like a song lyric will trip something, or usually I won't have the whole premise down for something, but if I'll have like like a nugget of an idea, and I honestly don't even know where it comes from. Like some of them come from really weird places. Some of them come from like the jog. I had one story, a 5 minute life. It came to me full blown, like lying in bed right before I fell asleep, from start to finish, the whole plot. I knew the whole thing, and I was like, "What?" Like it was the easiest writing process I think I ever had. I wish they were all like that. But just like the whole thing, I was like, "Wow, thank you. I'll just take notes here about this." So yeah, it's like I don't know. I think it's also part of like what mood I'm in or like where I am at in my own life, like what kind of story I want to tell. I try to put like the stories ahead of me. Like if I'm going through something, I'll write about it and the characters will find their HEA or they'll get through it, even though if I'm not there yet, but I can at least put it there kind of in front of me like an aspirational type of thing, I guess. So yeah, it just depends on like so like if I was having um like doubts about my own creativity, let's say, then I'd end up with a story about someone who is going through doubts about their own creativity and put that in the book, if that makes sense. So that's kind of where it comes from. As to where the bits and pieces, I don't know, like magical, I guess. It feels magical sometimes. And then, and a lot of stuff comes out of research. Once I start researching, research is just great for getting new ideas and for taking ideas and expanding them towards something else.
That's awesome. And I love that. I mean, the imagination is truly so magnificent. And I think that's the coolest thing about authors is like I I like to read the stories. I could not brain power and think of all that. And, talking to people and you're like, yeah, I was literally just like laying, like getting ready to sleep. And like the whole story just came to me. The people are like, yeah, I was just sitting at a coffee shop and I heard, one story or like one name. And I just like immediately knew this whole life story for this character. And I'm like, that's so cool. I could never I love that there are people out here that have that ability. So then readers get to read all of the stories. So I think that's fascinating, just how you pick up, like you said, those different nuggets. Once you have, like you said, one of those ideas, what is
Mhm.
that writing process like? Do you feel like you're more of, I know this the term that authors use, like the plotter or the pantser when it
Mhm.
you're writing? How kind of is your style of what's okay, this is what I'm thinking about writing. What is that process like for you to get that story out there?
I'm definitely not a plotter. No, pantser. I'm not a pantser. I cannot just sit and start typing. It'll be a hot mess of just I don't even know what. I have to have some kind of an outline. So, but as long as I have an outline and I know where I'm going, I have to know what the end is, like what the end or the end game is. I may not know what the scene looks like, but I have to know what the result is going to be. And then within that outline, it can be very fluid. Like the characters will do and say things that I did not expect or want them to do sometimes. And then it takes the story in a different direction. And I just let it be that way in the outline. I just let it, and I might have to revise and that sort of thing. But that's usually my process. And I'll take like note cards and I'll like note card out scenes or chapters. And then I kind of put them on a cork board. And then as I write them, I take them off, which is a nice way of seeing how many chapters I have left to go. Or sometimes I have to rewrite the whole thing or like take some out and put stuff in. So it's a fluid process, but yeah, definitely have to have some kind of outline or else and a deadline or else I will not get anything done. Like not one thing.
Do you feel like when you're typically writing, like even with your outline, that you like to go through things in order? Like you like to start towards the front of the book, or do you just kind of jump all around and you're like, you think of a scene and so you write out that scene, and then you think of another scene, and it doesn't matter where it's at in the book, you just kind of do it as you're thinking of it?
Yeah, so well, that's a really good question. I haven't thought of that in a long time. I always have to have I start at the beginning because if I don't know the progression or if the progression of their like love story isn't like going in order, then it like let's say like something's wrong in chapter 3, I can't be like, well, I'll fix it later on, go on to chapter 4 because whatever happened in 3 informs what happens in chapter 4. So I have to have 3 done, at least not edited perfectly, but you know what I mean? Just like it has to be finished to a degree where I can continue on and I know what the characters are doing and saying. However, I will sometimes, I haven't done this in a long time actually. A sex scene will come to me first. Like, and it's so weird. And I don't know if it's because I'm like in the mood or whatever, but like I'll write the sex scene and then I know nothing about the plot. I don't know what's happening or where this is or anything, but it sort of tells me what the characters want from each other in that moment. It's usually the first time they have sex together. Like, so it's always like, what do they want from each other? What's the dynamic? What's happening right before and what's happening right after? And that was like really helpful for like I did that for Full Tilt and like for a couple of stories. It's really helpful to kind of navigate where they were, but then I'd have to write up to that point. I couldn't do any more jumping around, unfortunately.
That makes sense. I feel like for me, that would be as a reader, I'm like, man, you're starting there. That's great. Starting big, and then we're bringing it up to that moment. So
Yeah, let's get that out of the way. Just, you know.
that's awesome. That's just how the brain works. Sometimes it's like you think of things in big pieces, and so your brain's like, all right,
Mhm.
I know that this is what people want to get to. That this is a lot of what people want to. So let's just nail that. Make sure it's solid.
Let's give them what they want.
And then we'll work our way back up to what we need to do to get to that moment. That's so awesome. So for your books, I know some authors maybe have a little bit more of a hands-off approach, or some have like a really hands-on approach when it comes to your book covers. Do you find yourself, does it depend on the book? Are you overly involved? Are you not very involved? Kind of what's that process like for you deciding to pick a cover for a book?
Sometimes I'll have like a very generalized idea of what I might want, but I'm terrible like a graphic artist and design. I'm like, I cannot. So I will just usually let the cover artist, I'll tell them what the story is about. I'll say, if we want to do more discreet or if we want flowers or if we want people, that kind of general thing. And then I let them do their thing because I feel like each artist has their own like they have their art, they have their talent. And so I don't want to step over into their art and be like, no, this has to be like this and this needs to be like that. I just know if it works for me or if it doesn't once I see something, which is not really helpful to them. A lot of times my cover artist will be like, you got to give me some help. And I'm like, no, I'll just know when I see it if I like it or don't like it. Sorry. Like, and most of the time that really works. I've never really had to change a cover or like start from the ground up unless except this one time where I tried to design and I told my designer what I wanted and she tried to put it together and it just didn't work, not because of what she did but because of what my vision was not good. So that was really the only time that I, stepped into their realm and it backfired. So I'm really pretty happy with just anything that they come up with. And then if we make tweaks in here and there, that's fine. But usually they just kind of nail it, hit it out of the park. I'm really lucky.
That's awesome. I think that's a huge thing that a lot of time we say don't pick a book by its cover, don't judge a book by its cover, but it's human nature. Like if you see a cover that's really pretty, you're like, oh, I want to read that, or like you're
Hmm.
interested enough to like pick up the back and like read what it's about and everything, and then decide if you want to purchase it or not. So I think it's always cool to ask that question just to see kind of how much are really involved in it and some are not as involved in it. So I think that's always fun to kind of go and see all the different areas. I have a fun question for you now, and it can be difficult for some authors.
Okay.
Do you feel like you have I know it's like asking authors to pick their children. Do you have a
Oh
favorite
no.
that you've ever written?
A favorite character?
A
Is
favorite
that
book?
what? Oh, favorite book. Oh geez. Usually it's the last one that's been written is the one that's kind of like in my universe the most, and it's like my favorite technically. But once I have some space, then yeah, then I think there's some that have affected readers more than others, and they become kind of favorites to me for that reason. Like my MMs tend to have a very visceral emotional response to readers, which I really love. And I love my MM characters like inordinately. So when you come back to me, I think is a favorite, and someday. Full tilt, I think, because it is very kind of like one of the most emotional ones that I had written, and there's a lot in there that resonated with so many people. And then what else? I think Rush too, because it's kind of like a classic of mine. Like, not that it's like classic literature. I just mean like in my realm, it's older and it's kind of like the first time I really was finding my voice, I think, for like how things were going to be from then on. And then the readership um was just so embracing of it and then of me and kind of welcome me into that world. And so like it's dedicated to Joanne, that's Joanne Goodspeed Ragona, who is like one of my primary readers from way back then, and she's still with me today, and we're like good friends. I just love that aspect of this community, especially where there's the reader and then the author, but there doesn't have to be, and there usually isn't like this big separation. Like it's like we're all in this together like a family kind of, and it's really wonderful. And I think that, for you're being highly complimentary about my writing, or authors writing processes, but we wouldn't really, it would be nothing without readers, to like embrace those stories and appreciate them. So I love that, like that sense of community in this romance community that I don't think you get in too many other genres personally.
No, I definitely feel like, especially the romance community, people are just very close, and there's so many different, you know, tropes and types of romance books and ways that people can tell stories. And so it's so fun and unique when you get a different one, but how people just band together. And especially,
Yeah.
romance is something that everybody, I feel like, once in their life. And so either like if they haven't had romance in their life, like they pick up a romance book hoping for something, that they can have one day, or, if you do find your
Yeah.
romance, it's like fun to read other people's stories because it's different from how you fell in love and all that stuff. So I think that's one thing that I just love about this genre, like you said. And I think it's why people don't necessarily understand non-readers why it's such a big genre, but for
Right.
those who are readers, it's like one of their favorite because you just get to fall, like you get to watch all these different people fall in love, and who doesn't love
Yeah. Yeah, it's about love, and like that's like the primary driving force of the whole universe. So when people don't understand what yeah, like what you said, why readers are drawn to that, it's like, well, why wouldn't they be? That's like what it's all about. So
totally
yeah.
agree with you there. So when you're not writing books, what is, I know it's like authors, every time I ask them that, they're like, when I'm not writing, I'm usually writing. What do you like to do hobby wise or just for fun to kind of like step back and be like, I need some time away from writing? Obviously, like that is a job, so you need to be able to take breaks from that. What do you
Right.
do for fun when you're not writing?
Oh geez. I feel like I am on the lazier side of the writing spectrum. So I wish I was more like I'm always writing and my time off is so like precious to me. But mostly I like to kid that I'm like really busy for like 4 weeks, 3 times a year, like where I'm really doing the actual work. I love taking care of plants, which is like maybe sounds super boring, but I love it. And I love watching really good television that's like really well written, like Succession. And I also like reading or watching, trashier television just for like the, release vacation.
Like The Bachelor,
Um,
things like that?
what's that?
Like things like The Bachelor and stuff like that?
No, I'm currently watching Botched on Netflix, which is about botched plastic surgeries. That is
Always
my
talking about that at work. They're like, "Have you watched Botch? You need to watch Botch." I haven't watched it yet personally, but I know what you're talking about because everyone's talking about it.
It's just I'm like, "Why am I watching this?" But I'm like, it's just on my lunch break. They're like, 40 minutes long. They're just perfect amount of time, and I don't have to think of anything heavy or anything, and I just watch that. So that's what I'm doing right now. And then otherwise, I don't know, I just like spending time with my little Talia, and I was volunteering at her school for the first time ever. I'm not a volunteer, and I did, so yay me. But, and reading, of course. I just read constantly. I love podcasts too. Podcasts are like my new thing. I'm always on the podcast. There's like a million of them, and I'm making my way through all of them slowly.
I love podcasts. I didn't used to think that I would be a big podcast person, and then in
Me
turn,
neither.
audiobook person because I was like, I need a physical book or like my Kindle or something. And I've found that I love audiobooks. I love podcasts. I love, the simple things in life while you're folding laundry or cooking
Mhm.
dinner or, just even in the car, just doing simple things. You said you keep plants alive. I cannot keep a plant alive to save my life. I try so hard. I had a bonsai tree, and apparently those things
Aw.
are hard to kill, and I still somehow managed to kill mine. I guess I don't have a green thumb. I've tried really hard and I just have accepted that about myself. But
Nice.
doing all of those things, it's nice to just have something like, I don't know, my brain, I like to have things constantly like going, whether that's again a book or a podcast or something. So I totally understand because I'm the same way.
Yeah, I used to not like audiobooks at all either, and I cannot listen to my own at all. It's just way too weird. But the more I listen to podcasts, the more I was like, "Oh yeah, I can just get an audiobook and do the same thing, walk the dog and listen." And it's like blown my mind what people have been doing for years. I'm like, "Oh yeah, it is cool."
Think it's so interesting. You said, you can't listen to your own
No.
book because you feel like it's weird, which I've had authors and friends of mine who are authors that are like on the other spectrum. And they're like, as soon as I have like an audiobook done, I like to listen to it because I feel like it's a brand new story for me because the narrators, they're voice actors. Like they're actors. They know what they're doing. And so it's like, I feel like I just lived this like a brand new first time because I get to hear these voices in my head and everything.
Mhm.
It's so different.
No,
So
that's totally true. I feel that's the same way in the couple of times I actually did listen. I was like, "Wow, this is so cool. This is like these 2 people bringing this story to life, and it's like my story." And then I'm like, I can't. I don't know what it is. It's like I can't do it. Like if they ever were to make a movie out of mine, God willing, I don't know if I'd be able to watch that either. I would just be like, I don't know what it is. So like so weird.
you have to be one of those people that wouldn't want, because I know a lot of people, and they're authors and they do have movies made that they are like assistant director, or they're on the set too and they're like
Oh,
helping
right.
stuff. Would you find yourself not being able to do that? You'd be like, you know what? Take it. I trust it.
I
Like,
would I yeah, I think I would say as long as you don't change, like, the fundamentalness or, like or change something's intrinsic to the story, I'd be like, "Have at it." Like, set it in, like, Alaska. I don't care what you need to do. Just tell me when it's ready.
that's awesome. I love that so much. Yeah. I don't know like if like I said, I've never had the creative thought in my head to write a book, but I feel like that would be hard for me, um to have to listen or like be like, "Oh my gosh, like how are people going to take this?" And movies is like a whole other thing
Yeah,
because
yeah.
people that don't read that, but then when you give them a movie, it's like you have a whole other audience of people that, it's good and bad. Will then either go pick up your book or be like, "Oh, I hated that." And it's like, "Please don't take."
Right. Or if they change it at all, then you're like, "No, that's not what I had," but, well, it's done, I don't know. But, I mean, I think that'd still be a good problem to have. I wouldn't say no, but I would probably be watching, like, through my fingers or something.
So funny. That's awesome. Well, is there anything that I haven't asked today that maybe you want to talk about a little bit more? Things you want to maybe say to readers or anything like that?
I don't think so. It was awesome, like, so many questions that I wasn't, like, expecting or hadn't thought of in a while, so it was really lovely to have my brain be like, "Oh, yeah, remember all those?" because it kind of like makes you go back through the history, especially with dealing with Rush, where it was like it was a long time ago and it was at the beginning of the career, so it's kind of nice to like revisit those like feelings and moments and stuff. But no, I don't think so. I just a big thank you as always to you and every other reader who supports us and does things like this to help us spread the word and to like and just not even that, just reads the work and like and loves it. So I appreciate that so much.
Absolutely. Like I said, I loved everything about Rush. I think it was it was a different romance, but I say that like it's a really good, I loved the fact that it was so different, that it was, Noah was struggling with something and Charlotte was there to help him, but she was also going through something. And so it was like they helped each other get through their hard times. And then so like it helps them to fall in love because they had each other to depend on. And I thought that was really awesome, that you don't
Awesome.
get a ton of stories like that. And so for me, it was like, unique in a sense that I was like, this one's gonna stick with me for a long time. And so I love that about
Oh, thank you.
Rush.
That's so nice to hear. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. And where can people find you if they maybe have never heard of you and are really excited now? They're like, okay, I need to pick up Rush, I need to pick up Full Tilt, whatever book that they want to. Where's the best place for them to either connect with you and also to find your books?
So, Instagram is a good one for books related stuff, Instagram or Facebook, I would say. I'm not on Twitter, but I am on Threads, although that is more, I don't know, that's too bookish to be on Threads. I'm just kind of there catching up with the news. And then on Goodreads, of course, if they wanted to see anything or my Amazon page. But yeah, I think Facebook and Instagram are the best places to get in touch. So,
Awesome. And then they can find your books, you said, on Amazon or
yeah, on Amazon, they're all there. And then I have audiobooks there for almost all of them, I think. Some are still in the works, but yeah, so the audiobook readers will find them there too.
awesome. Well, thank you so much again for coming on today. I had so much fun talking with you.
Thank you. So did I. It was really wonderful. Nice to be here.
Yes. And you guys make sure you're staying everything up to date on Michaela's Book Nook. You can be subscribed here on my YouTube, or if you're listening on my podcast, saying subscribe to the podcast. And until next time, thanks, guys.
Bye.